I sat frozen in my chair, every eye in the room fixed on me. Across the glossy boardroom table, Sienna, his Gen Z niece, barely 24, tilted her chin and let a smug little smile spread across her face. She was already wearing the company badge that used to hang from my neck. Then Marcus's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You're finished here, Dahlia. 25 years is long enough." That was the moment everything I had sacrificed, my health, my family, my life, collapsed into silence. What Marcus didn't realize was that he had just signed his own downfall. The air in the boardroom was thick enough to choke on. A dozen pairs of eyes watched me, but none with warmth. The long mahogany table gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its surface polished smooth, like a stage prepared for an execution. At the head sat Marcus Stroud, the man I had once believed to be a visionary, now only a mask of arrogance and exhaustion. His voice was smooth, but it carried the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "Dahlia," he said, leaning back, fingers steepled, 25 years is a long time. You've done enough for this company. It's time for fresh energy." The words landed like blows. My pulse drummed in my ears. I looked at the girl seated 2 chairs down from him, Sienna, 24, his niece, plucked straight out of a marketing course she never even finished. She adjusted her blazer like she belonged in that seat. Her smirk told me she already knew what was coming. The silence in the room stretched. No one spoke up for me. Not one voice reminded Marcus of the nights I slept under my desk while saving the company from collapse. Not one dared to mention how my strategies had turned near bankruptcy into record-breaking profits. I swallowed the fire clawing at my throat. If I spoke now, they'd see my rage. And rage was weakness in their world. "Is this a joke?" I asked finally, my voice low, controlled. Marcus's smile was almost pitying. "You should think of this as a celebration. A graceful exit. A new chapter." Graceful exit. As if being shoved off the edge of a cliff was elegant. Sienna leaned forward, tapping her manicured nails against the table. "We'll all handle things from here. You've paved the way." The way she said it, like I was some fossil dug out of the dirt, made bile rise in my throat. My mind spun. Images flashed. My son's 10th birthday, where I arrived after midnight to find the cake already cut. The anniversary dinner I canceled because Marcus needed me in Tokyo. The doctor's warning about my rising blood pressure, which I'd laughed off because the company couldn't run without me. And now, it seemed, it could. But beneath the humiliation, something darker stirred, a sharp memory of a decision I had made years ago, when Marcus first showed signs of recklessness. I had inserted clauses, safeguards, tiny threads of ownership woven into the patents and designs. Marcus never bothered to read the fine print. He trusted me. Foolish man. I felt the weight of that knowledge settle in my chest like a cold stone. It steadied me. Marcus shuffled papers, dismissing me with a flick of his hand. "HR will guide you through the transition. You'll leave with dignity." Dignity. He had no idea how ironic that word would become. I rose slowly, collecting myself. My chair scraped against the polished floor, a sound that made the whole room flinch. Their eyes followed me, expecting tears, an outburst, a plea. Instead, I straightened my blazer, looked Marcus in the eye, and smiled, not with warmth, but with the calmness of a woman who had already written his obituary. "Congratulations," I said softly. "You've just made the most expensive mistake of your life." The smirk vanished from Sienna's face. Marcus blinked. The others shifted uncomfortably. They didn't understand yet, but they would. I gathered my notebook, its pages filled with sketches, formulas, and secrets no one else could decipher, and walked out of the boardroom. Behind me, the empire I had built with my own blood believed it had cut me loose. What they didn't know was that I wasn't falling. I was waiting. The elevator doors closed with a dull metallic sigh, sealing me away from the boardroom's polished betrayal. My reflection stared back at me from the mirrored walls, lipstick perfect, posture straight, but eyes hollow. I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. For years, I had been their anchor, their shield. The late-night calls, the endless travel, the strategies that pulled them from ruin, those were mine. And yet, as the elevator hummed down floor by floor, I realized something brutal. I had been nothing but a tool. Tools are replaced when they wear out. The lobby greeted me with its sterile glow. Colleagues glanced up from their desks, whispers flickering behind polite smiles. They already knew. News travels faster than oxygen, in places like this. A junior associate stepped forward, his face awkward with sympathy. I brushed past him without a word. Sympathy was salt in an open wound. Outside, the city's winter air slapped me across the face, sharp and sobering. My heels clicked against the pavement, steady and deliberate. Every step away from that glass fortress felt less like retreat and more like ignition. I didn't go home. Home was suffocating walls, lined with framed awards and photos of conferences that now mocked me. Instead, I walked into the night, letting the city's noise drown out the static in my head. My phone buzzed endlessly. HR, Marcus, even my assistant all eager to tidy the mess, to make my erasure neat. I turned it off, let them stew in silence. Hours later, I sat alone at a corner table in a dim cafe. The coffee was bitter, untouched. My notebook lay open, its pages covered in scribbled formulas, contracts, diagrams, my real legacy. I traced my pen over one particular page. The ownership clause buried deep within the patents. The one no one else understood. They thought they had cut me loose. What they had done was release me from restraint. For the first time in 25 years, I wasn't bound by loyalty. I remembered Marcus's smug voice, a graceful exit. The arrogance of believing I would leave quietly. He had underestimated the woman who built his empire. That mistake would cost him everything. The rage wasn't fire. It wasn't screaming or weeping. It was quiet, surgical, precise. Like a scalpel sliding through flesh. Over the next days, I perfected the art of invisibility. I signed the papers, handed over the company car, cleared my office all with the grace they expected. But behind the mask, I was dismantling their world piece by piece. First, I visited the lawyers. Discreet ones, the kind who didn't advertise on billboards, the kind who knew how to read silence between the lines of contracts. I watched their eyes widen as they scanned my documents. Their whispers turned into respectful nods. One of them looked at me, astonished, and said, "They don't know you own this, do they?" "No," I replied, calm. "And I want to keep it that way. For now." Then came the banks. I shifted funds quietly, strategically. Accounts Marcus thought were under his control were already beyond his reach. He had been too careless, too trusting. My fingerprints were on every blueprint, every financial artery. He had given me the keys without realizing it. At night, I sat in my living room, lights dim, silence heavy. My son called, worried. I told him I was fine. He didn't need to know the storm gathering inside me. Let him think his mother was resting after a long career. One day, he would understand. The anger no longer felt like poison. It felt like power. Each move I made was calculated, quiet, invisible to them. They saw me as finished, discarded. That blindness was my weapon. I returned to the cafe often, notebook in hand, charting every step of their collapse. Around me, strangers laughed, couples argued, life went on. None of them knew that at that small table in the corner, an empire was being rewritten. By the end of that week, the rage had cooled into something sharper. Purpose. I wasn't rushing. Revenge done in haste is messy. I wanted precision. I wanted Marcus and his glittering niece to feel the walls close in slowly, unbearably. Until they realized too late whose hands were tightening around their throats. I closed my notebook one night and whispered to myself, almost like a vow. They wanted a graceful exit. I'll give them one. But it will be theirs, not mine. The first strike was never going to be loud. That's not how you dismantle an empire. You don't walk in with fire, you pull out the foundation stone and watch the structure tilt. I chose the trade conference in Dubai. A glittering spectacle of suits, champagne, and whispered deals. Marcus was attending with his niece, parading her as the future of innovation. The press loved it. Investors loved it. That made it the perfect stage. From the shadows of my hotel suite, I watched the coverage unfold. Cameras flashed, microphones swarmed. Marcus stood there, his arm draped around her shoulders, introducing her like a prized racehorse. What none of them knew was that the patents she was bragging about, the ones she claimed to have refined, still carried my signature, hidden in legal ink. A clause no journalist would notice. But I had made sure the right journalist would. 2 days before the conference, I'd leaked select documents to a quiet investigative reporter. Not one of the flashy types who chased headlines. Someone patient, meticulous, hungry for the truth. She had cross-checked every line, verified every source. By the time Marcus took the stage, the article was already scheduled to drop. I didn't attend the conference. I didn't need to. My presence wasn't the point, my absence was. From my suite, I opened the live stream. Marcus spoke with the ease of a man convinced the world was still in his pocket. The niece nodded along, parroting lines I had written years ago. Then the shift came. Phones started buzzing in the audience. Heads bent over screens. Whispers spread like smoke. I could see Marcus falter for a fraction of a second, the smile stiffening on his face. He didn't know it yet, but the story had hit. The article laid it bare. The patents, the ownership trail, the hidden clauses, all credited to me. Not as an employee, as a co-owner, quietly, legally, indisputably. The niece's innovation was nothing but recycled work. The empire Marcus had paraded as his legacy was built on contracts he had overlooked, and I still held the strings. Investors don't like surprises. They especially don't like being lied to. Within hours, calls flooded his phone. Shares trembled. Partners hesitated. The niece, flushed and frantic, tried to salvage the presentation, but the questions rained down. Who actually owns these rights? Was this theft? What role did Evelyn play? Evelyn. My name, on their lips again. Not in whispers, not in sympathy, in awe. Back in my suite, I closed the live stream. My hands didn't shake. There was no thrill, no laughter, no dramatic outburst. Just quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from sliding the first chess piece across the board and watching your opponent realize the game has begun. That night, I walked along the marina. The city glittered, artificial and hollow. I thought of Marcus pacing in his hotel suite, shouting into his phone, the niece in tears. They had expected me to fade into silence. Instead, I had re-emerged, louder than ever, without speaking a single word. But this was only the first fracture. I didn't want their humiliation to be temporary. I wanted it to spread, to fester, to rot the core of everything they had taken from me. The next moves required patience. I reached out to 3 former colleagues, people Marcus had discarded over the years. Each of them carried scars from his ambition. Each of them remembered me as the one who had listened when no one else did. It didn't take much persuasion. Wounds like theirs don't heal, they wait. Together, we began assembling files. Not forged, not fabricated. The truth, misused funds, unpaid royalties, safety shortcuts buried under polished reports. Marcus had always been sloppy when he believed no one was watching. I had always been watching. Late at night, my apartment became a war room. Papers spread across the floor, glowing laptop screens, the smell of stale coffee. My allies came and went quietly, their eyes sharp with renewed purpose. One of them said, "You're not just getting revenge, Evelyn. You're rewriting history." I didn't answer. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I was just finally collecting a debt, long overdue. Marcus tried to reach me during those weeks. Emails, calls, even a handwritten letter delivered to my door. The words were desperate, wrapped in false civility. "We can still work this out. We're family, family." The word was an insult. I burned the letter without reading past the first line. Ash crumbled in the sink, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. By the end of that month, rumors had hardened into truths. Investors began pulling out. The press dug deeper. Marcus's golden facade cracked wider each day. His niece stopped appearing in public altogether. And still, I stayed silent. I didn't grant interviews. I didn't make statements. Silence was my sharpest weapon. Let them choke on it. Because the truth was simple. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had erased me. And now, I wasn't merely taking back what was mine. I was teaching them what it feels like to be forgotten until all that remained of their empire was the echo of my name. The first strike had landed. The boardroom that once cast me out was no longer steady ground. And I wasn't finished. Not even close. The beauty of betrayal is that it never happens in isolation. One man's treachery leaves behind a trail of broken people who, given the right spark, will rise again as fire. Marcus had collected more enemies than he realized. All I had to do was remind them. It began with Clara. Once the brightest engineer in the firm, she had left quietly after Marcus refused to credit her designs. She spent years freelancing, brilliant but bitter. When I called, her silence stretched for a long, loaded moment before she whispered, "I thought I'd never hear from you again." "You will," I said. "Because we're not finished." Then there was Rahul, a project manager Marcus had pushed out after blaming him for a failed launch, a failure Marcus himself had caused. Rahul still kept the files, tucked away like scars. When I asked if he still wanted justice, he didn't hesitate. "Tell me where to start." And finally, Sarah. She hadn't just been betrayed. She had been ruined. Marcus had taken her research, claimed it as his, and left her with nothing but debts. Her voice trembled when she answered my message, but her fury was steady. "If this is real," she said, "if you're really going after him, I'm in." 3 voices, 3 flames. Together with mine, we became something Marcus had no defense against. Memory sharpened into a weapon. We met in hidden corners, borrowed apartments, rented rooms where no one would think to look. Every meeting began the same. Papers spread across a table, laptops glowing like silent conspirators, the air humming with tension. Clara was meticulous, her mind still sharp with technical detail. She uncovered flaws in Marcus's past projects, shortcuts that endangered lives but were buried under paperwork. Rahul supplied contracts, receipts, meeting notes, breadcrumbs that led to fraud Marcus thought had been forgotten. Sarah brought passion, the kind that turned grief into fire. She dug through archives, pulled forgotten voices into the light, and every time she found a document with Marcus's forged signature, her hands shook with both rage and satisfaction. I didn't lead them like a commander. I guided them like a conductor, drawing strength from their rhythms. Each brought something the others couldn't. Together, we created a symphony of truth, too loud to silence. But revenge requires more than evidence. It requires timing, patience, precision. Strike too fast, and the enemy recovers. Strike too late, and the momentum dies. So I built the plan. Each move layered carefully over the last. Clara would quietly contact regulators, feeding them pieces of information under assumed names. Rahul would leak select documents to trusted journalists, enough to spark curiosity but not enough to point back to us. Sarah would reach out to former employees, gathering testimonies, weaving a net of voices Marcus couldn't ignore. And me, I would stay at the center, invisible. Pulling strings, cutting threads, placing every pawn exactly where I needed it. Marcus noticed, of course. His empire trembled louder every week. Investors grew restless, regulators sniffed at the doors, and whispers spread through boardrooms like wildfire. He lashed out at shadows, accusing rivals, blaming leaks, threatening lawsuits. But the harder he fought, the more cracks appeared. I watched from a distance, unseen but omnipresent. Each night, as reports came in on inquiry opened here, an article published there, I sat in the dark of my apartment, the city lights flickering against the window, and allowed myself one small smile. The allies weren't just weapons, they were mirrors, reflecting back everything Marcus had destroyed. Clara, once voiceless, now spoke with precision that cut through lies. Rahul, once branded incompetent, now wielded truth like a scalpel. Sarah, once broken, now rose each day with fire in her eyes. And as I watched them rise, I realized something. This wasn't only about revenge. This was about resurrection. Not just mine, but theirs. Marcus had thought he was building a dynasty. What he had built instead was a graveyard of talent, a field of ghosts. And now, those ghosts were marching, hand in hand, toward his door. The final piece came unexpectedly. One evening, Clara arrived with a file she hadn't meant to find. Buried in old blueprints was proof of a cover-up, one so dangerous it could bring criminal charges. A safety failure Marcus had ignored. A decision that had cost lives. The room fell silent as we read it. The weight of it pressed against our lungs. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. This was about reckoning. We could destroy him with this, Rahul said, his voice low. No, Sarah corrected, her eyes burning. We will destroy him with this. And in that moment, the plan shifted. We were no longer dismantling an empire, piece by piece. We were preparing for detonation. The allies had become more than weapons. They had become an army. And Marcus, for the first time in his life, had no idea how badly outnumbered he really was. The storm had gathered. Every whisper, every document, every testimony we unearthed had stacked like dry wood. All it needed was a spark. That spark came at Marcus's own hand. He was desperate now, clawing at board members, promising results he couldn't deliver, tightening his grip on a company already choking under his lies. He announced a grand event. A press conference to unveil his greatest innovation yet. A desperate attempt to shift the narrative, to distract from the growing scrutiny. It was the stage we'd been waiting for. The plan was simple in appearance, intricate in execution. Clara would plant technical leaks in quiet corners of the internet, a blueprint here. A safety report there, just enough for journalists to sniff blood before the event. Rahul coordinated with whistleblower organizations, timing the release of damning contracts to coincide with Marcus's speech. Sarah lined up former employees ready to speak, their statements recorded, timed, sharpened like blades, and I prepared the centerpiece. The file Clara had discovered, proof that Marcus had ignored a catastrophic flaw, one that had cost real human lives. It wasn't just scandal. It was crime. The day of the event arrived like thunder. Marcus stood on stage, cameras flashing, lights burning, his voice steady but eyes betraying the tremor of a cornered man. He spoke of vision, of legacy, of innovation. The words spilled like oil slick, rehearsed, hollow. And then, right on cue, the fire began to spread. Phones buzzed in the audience. Screens lit up with breaking headlines. Regulators open investigation into Marcus Hale Industries. Whistleblowers allege fraud, safety violations. Exclusive. Documents reveal cover-up of fatal flaw. You could see it on his face, the moment he realized the room was slipping away. A murmur spread, cameras turning not on him but on the screens of journalists. His words faltered, stuttered, then stumbled into silence. I wasn't in the room, I didn't need to be. I watched it unfold live, the broadcast flickering across my laptop, his empire, once untouchable, collapsing in real time. Within hours, board members distanced themselves, statements flooding in. Stock prices plummeted. The regulators' investigation escalated from inquiry to full-scale probe. Investors fled, allies vanished, contracts dissolved. Marcus's kingdom wasn't crumbling slowly, it was imploding. And then came the final strike. We released the file. The one with proof of negligence. The one tied to loss of life. It spread like wildfire, beyond control, beyond denial. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about justice in its rawest form. Reporters circled his mansion. Protesters gathered outside his headquarters, holding up names of the dead his decisions had buried. Politicians who once praised him, now condemned him. His name, once gilded in admiration, became synonymous with corruption, arrogance, and ruin. And Marcus, he disappeared from the spotlight. The man who once thrived on cameras, who fed on admiration, vanished into shadows. Rumors whispered of breakdowns, of locked doors, of desperate calls unanswered. But I didn't need rumors. I knew what had broken him. It wasn't the money. He had more than enough to live in comfort, even stripped of power. It wasn't even the reputation, though watching his name rot in headlines was sweet. No, what destroyed Marcus Hale was the truth he could never escape. That he was no longer untouchable. That the very people he discarded had risen, hand in hand, to tear him down. He had built his empire on the bones of others, and those bones had clawed their way out of the dirt. For me, the victory wasn't in headlines or numbers. It was in watching Clara smile again, a real smile, the kind she hadn't worn in years. It was in Rahul, standing taller, his voice steady, no longer haunted by false blame. It was in Sarah's eyes, no longer trembling, now burning with a quiet triumph. We hadn't just destroyed Marcus. We had rebuilt ourselves. The trap had worked. The fall was complete. And as I closed the last file, shut down the last encrypted channel, I realized something. Revenge hadn't consumed me. It had freed me. Marcus Hale's story was over. Ours had only just begun. The storm passed, but the silence it left behind was almost louder. For weeks, the world couldn't stop talking about Marcus Hale. Every news cycle carved deeper into his carcass-board resignations, asset freezes, court summons. His empire had been dismantled piece by piece, until all that remained was a hollow shell carrying his name like a curse. And then, just as suddenly, the noise faded. The cameras turned elsewhere. The world moved on. But for us it was different. The echoes remained. I remember the first time I walked past the glass tower that once bore his company's name in gleaming letters. They'd been stripped down, leaving nothing but rust-stained outlines against the concrete. The lobby was empty, security gates hanging ajar, the silence inside, heavy with abandonment. For years, I had entered this place with a weight on my chest, a reminder of battles lost and scars carried. But now, standing there in the ruins of his ambition, I felt nothing. No bitterness. No triumph. Just emptiness. Because revenge doesn't give back what was stolen. It doesn't erase the sleepless nights or the fear etched into your bones. It doesn't heal the betrayals. What it gives is something quieter. The knowledge that justice, however imperfect, had found its mark. Clara went back to her work, this time on her own terms. She rebuilt her reputation in the industry, not as Marcus's victim, but as the architect of a new path. She smiled more often now, And when she did, it wasn't forced. Rahul rejoined his family's business, free of Marcus's shadow, free of shame. He told me once over coffee that for the first time in years, he could look in the mirror without flinching. That mattered more than any courtroom victory. Sarashi wrote again. Stories, not reports. She told me revenge had given her something she didn't expect. Her voice back, and when she laughed, it wasn't brittle, it carried warmth. As for me, I thought the end would feel like standing on a peak, arms raised, a cry of triumph. Instead, it felt like walking out of a storm into still air. The hunger that had driven me, that had burned in my chest for so long, simply quieted. One night, I sat alone, staring at the final article that sealed Marcus's fate. The photo showed him leaving a courthouse, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, hair unkempt. He looked small, almost fragile. The world saw disgrace. I saw something else, an echo of the man who once looked at me like I was nothing, and in that moment, I understood something. Revenge hadn't destroyed Marcus Hale, he had destroyed himself, long before we set the match to his empire. We had only given the world the truth. That realization left me unsettled. For years, I believed my purpose was to make him suffer. But in the end, I saw that he had been suffering long before his fall. His greed, his arrogance, his inability to see people as anything but tools. Those were his prison bars. His empire was never a monument. It was a cage he built around himself, brick by brick. And maybe that was the cruelest truth of all. So where did that leave me? Standing at the edge of his ruin, I realized revenge had been a bridge, not a destination. It had carried me out of darkness, but it wasn't where I was meant to stay. The future stretched ahead, quiet, uncertain, but free. Free of his shadow, free of his voice in my head. Free to build something not born of anger, but of choice. Justice had been served. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but enough. And Marcus Hale, he became what he had always feared most, forgotten. His name faded from headlines, replaced by new scandals, new villains, new tragedies. His empire was sold off in fragments. The world moved forward, as it always does. And me. I walked away not with joy, not with regret, but with something far rarer. Peace, because revenge is never about the other person. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they tried to take. And in that, I had one.